Over 2,000 years ago, the Nazca people began creating what would become one of archaeology's greatest mysteries. More than 800 straight lines, 300 geometric figures, and 70 animal and plant designs covering 170 square miles of desert. But here's what will keep you listening. Despite decades of research, we still don't know exactly why they made them. From the woman who dedicated her life to protecting them, to the modern satellite technology revealing new lines every year, to the indigenous shamans who claim they still hold spiritual power, this is the complete history of the Nazca Lines. You're about to discover not just how they were made, but why their true purpose remains one of humanity's most enduring enigmas. But before we dive in, if you're new to this channel, consider hitting that like and subscribe button if you haven't already. Your support means we can continue producing these highly researched videos to help you learn something new or pass the time. Also, let us know where you're watching from and what time it is. So, without further ado, let's begin, shall we? The Unseen Canvas, an aerial view of the Peruvian desert. The Nazca Desert stretches across the coastal plain of southern Peru, barren, silent, a landscape of rust and sand where almost nothing grows. Rain falls here perhaps once every few years, sometimes less. The sky remains cloudless for months. The air is still. This is one of the driest places on Earth. For centuries, people walked across this desert. They crossed it. They lived near it. They saw the ground beneath their feet, but nothing more. The surface stones lay dark against the lighter soil below. Patterns existed in the dust, but from ground level they meant nothing. A line stretching toward the horizon, a cleared patch of earth. These things went unnoticed, or if noticed, unexplained. Then came flight. In the early decades of the 20th century, commercial airlines began mapping routes over Peru. Pilots flew low over the coastal desert, carrying passengers and mail between Lima and Arequipa. From their cockpits, something impossible emerged. Lines, shapes, figures drawn across the plateau in dimensions too vast to comprehend from the ground. A hummingbird with wings spread wide, longer than a city block. A spider, precise in its geometry. A monkey with a spiraling tail that stretched across the sand. The lines ran straight for miles, ignoring hills and gullies. Trapezoids the size of several football fields lay cleared and perfect. Triangles pointed toward distant mountains. And everywhere, connecting everything, were pathways etched into the desert floor, some wide enough for ceremonies, others thin as footpaths, all of them ancient. The Nazca Plateau sits between the towns of Nazca and Palpa. It covers nearly 200 square miles of pampa. The soil here is unique. Dark pebbles and oxidized stones coat the surface, baked by centuries of sun. Below lies lighter sand and clay. Remove the dark stones and you reveal a canvas. Create a line, and the contrast holds. The desert preserves what the hands have made. No wind disturbs these lines. No rain washes them away. The climate protects them. The isolation guards them. For more than 1,000 years, they have remained visible from the sky, waiting for eyes that could finally see them whole. From the air, the scale becomes clear. These are not small drawings. They are monuments. The hummingbird measures over 300 feet in length. The condor stretches more than 400 feet from wing to wing. The monkey, with its elegant spiral tail, covers a space larger than many ancient temples. Each line was made by hand. Each figure required planning, coordination, and vision beyond the immediate. The earliest aviators who saw them could hardly believe their eyes. How could an ancient people create something meant to be seen from a vantage point they could never reach? Who were these artists? What drove them to move tons of stone across the desert floor? And why these shapes? Why a spider? Why a hummingbird? Why hundreds of lines radiating from central points like spokes on an enormous wheel? The desert holds no answers in its silence. It simply displays the work. The lines curve and intersect. Figures overlap, suggesting different periods of creation. Some lines are older, some newer. Some figures are simple, others remarkably complex. A few contain such precision in their proportions that modern surveyors marvel at the achievement. Standing on the plateau itself offers little insight. A tourist might walk directly over the monkey's tail and see only a cleared path. The hummingbird's beak appears as a line of lighter soil, disappearing into the distance. Context vanishes. Meaning dissolves. Only from above does the intention reveal itself. This is the paradox that has fascinated researchers for nearly a century. A civilization without flight created art for the sky. People who lived close to the earth made images that demanded distance to comprehend. The Nazca Lines exist in a space between the practical and the sacred, between the human scale and the cosmic. The first pilots who reported seeing the lines were met with skepticism. Drawings in the desert visible only from the air? It seemed impossible. But the photographs began to accumulate. Archaeologists took notice. Scientists arrived with questions and theories. The Nazca Lines entered the modern consciousness as one of the great mysteries of the ancient world. Yet they are not merely mysterious. They are real. They exist. You can visit them. You can fly over them in a small plane and see the hummingbird tilting its beak toward the morning sun. You can trace the straight lines with your eye as they run toward the horizon. You can count the trapezoids and spirals and geometric forms that cover the plateau like a vast open-air gallery. The desert preserves them still. The climate remains dry. The isolation continues. Modern Peru protects the site, though threats persist. For now, the lines endure as they have for centuries. Silent, patient, waiting in the dust. This is where our story begins. In the sky above the desert, in the moment when the invisible became visible, when humanity looked down and saw what its ancestors had drawn upon the earth. The Nazca Lines are not just ancient art. They are a message across time, a testament to vision and effort, a reminder that people have always reached beyond themselves to create something lasting. The plateau stretches on beneath the sun. The lines remain, and slowly, carefully, we begin to understand the hands that made them and the culture that dreamed them into being. First glimpses. Toribio Mejia Chespe and Paul Kosak's discoveries. Before the pilots saw them, others had noticed something unusual. Local people in the Nazca region knew of the lines. They called them pathways. They walked along them. But the full scope remained hidden. What appeared as simple trails from ground level concealed a far greater design. The first scholar to document the lines was Toribio Mejia Chespe, a Peruvian archaeologist working in the region in the late 1920s. Mejia Chespe was surveying ancient sites when he encountered the cleared paths crossing the Pampa. He recognized them as intentional constructions. His reports described them as sacred roads, ceremonial paths created by the ancient inhabitants of the region. He published his findings in 1927, noting their unusual straightness and the care taken in their construction. Mejia Chespe understood these were not natural formations. The desert floor had been altered by human hands. He hypothesized they served ritual purposes, connecting sacred sites or serving as routes for religious processions. His work laid the foundation for all future study. Yet even he could not grasp their full scale. Without aerial photography, the complete designs remained obscured. Enter Paul Kosak. Kosak was an American historian from Long Island University. He arrived in Peru in 1941 to study ancient irrigation systems. His interest lay in how pre-Columbian societies managed water in the arid coastal regions. The Nazca area, with its network of underground aqueducts called puquios, seemed a perfect subject for research. While flying over the Nazca Plateau to photograph irrigation patterns, Kosak noticed the lines. From the air, they were unmistakable. Long, straight pathways, large, cleared areas, and then unexpectedly, figures. Figures. He saw what appeared to be a bird, then more shapes. The scale astonished him. Kosak realized immediately that these were not simple roads. He began photographing them systematically. He hired pilots to fly him over different sections of the plateau. He mapped what he could see. He took notes on orientation and alignment. The project that had brought him to Peru suddenly seemed secondary to this discovery. On June 21, 1941, Kosak stood on the Pampa at sunset during the winter solstice. He positioned himself at the end of one of the long, straight lines. As the sun descended toward the horizon, it set directly along the line's trajectory. The alignment was precise, too precise to be accidental. Kosak concluded that the lines served as an astronomical calendar, a tool for tracking the movements of the sun and stars. He called the Nazca Plateau the largest astronomy book in the world. The phrase captured imaginations. It suggested purpose and sophistication. It implied that the ancient Nazca people possessed knowledge of celestial mechanics and used the desert floor as both observatory and record. The theory made sense. Agricultural societies need to track seasons. Planting and harvest depend on accurate calendars. In a place where rain rarely falls, knowing when water might come or when to plant crops in the river valleys would be essential. Perhaps the lines marked solstices, equinoxes, or the rising points of important stars. Kosok's work brought international attention to the Nazca Lines. His photographs appeared in academic journals. His theories sparked debate. Other researchers began to take interest. The lines were no longer a local curiosity. They became a subject of serious scientific inquiry. But Kosok was not an archaeologist by training. His methods were those of an enthusiastic amateur. He made observations, drew conclusions, and moved on. He never conducted extensive excavation or detailed study. His most important contribution was recognition. He saw the lines for what they were, a massive intentional project by an ancient civilization. In 1946, Kosok returned to the United States. His interest in the lines continued, but from a distance. He had uncovered a mystery, proposed a solution, and left others to continue the work. His astronomical theory would be tested and refined by those who came after. The task of serious, sustained research fell to a German mathematician who arrived in Peru during the same period. She would dedicate her entire life to the lines. Her name was Maria Rieke, and she would transform understanding of the Nazca Plateau through decades of careful, methodical work. But before we turn to Rieke, we should pause and appreciate what Kosok achieved. He brought the lines into global consciousness. He applied scientific thinking to their purpose. He recognized that these were not random marks, but a coordinated effort with intention and meaning. He saw the desert as a canvas and the ancient Nazca people as artists and astronomers. The lines stretched before him in the Peruvian sun. They ran toward the mountains and across the flat plain. They formed shapes he could barely comprehend. And in that moment, standing at the end of a line as the solstice sun set along its path, Kosok felt he had glimpsed the mind of the ancient builders. They had looked to the sky. They had marked the earth. They had left a message that endured for centuries. The work of understanding that message had only just begun. The Priestess of the Plains, Maria Rieke's lifelong mission. Maria Rieche arrived in Peru in 1932. She was 29 years old. Trained as a mathematician and educator in Germany, she had come to South America seeking work as a governess and tutor. The position brought her to Cusco, where she taught the children of a German consul. Peru was far from home. The culture was unfamiliar. The language was different. Yet something about the country called to her. In 1946, Rieke met Paul Kosok. He was preparing to return to the United States and needed someone to continue his research on the Nazca Lines. Rieke spoke Spanish and German. She had mathematical training. She understood geometry and surveying. Kosok asked if she would be interested in studying the lines. She agreed. What began as a temporary project became her life's work. Rieke moved to Nazca. She rented a small room near the plateau. She had little money. She lived simply, spending almost nothing on herself. Every resource went toward her research. She bought a ladder, ropes, and surveying equipment. She hired local assistants. She began the slow, methodical process of mapping the lines. Her approach was meticulous. Rieke would rise before dawn and walk onto the plateau. She carried measuring tapes, notebooks, and a wooden ladder. She would position the ladder at various points to gain a slightly elevated view. From a few feet above the ground, his patterns became clearer. She could trace how lines connected. She could see where figures began and ended. Each line had to be measured, each curve documented, each figure drawn to scale. Rieke worked alone much of the time. The desert sun burned overhead. The pampa offered no shade. She wore a broad hat and wrapped cloth around her face against the dust. She walked miles each day, following lines across the plateau, noting their dimensions and orientations. She developed a system. Each major figure received a designation. She cataloged hundreds of individual lines. She recorded the angles at which they ran across the landscape. She noted which lines intersected and which remained isolated. The work required patience and precision. A single figure might take weeks to map completely. Rieke believed, like Kosok, that the lines served an astronomical purpose. She spent years trying to prove alignments between the lines and celestial events. She calculated the positions of stars as they would have appeared in the night sky 2,000 years ago. She marked solstices and equinoxes. She looked for patterns that might link specific lines to specific astronomical phenomena. Some alignments appeared convincing. Certain lines did point toward the rising or setting positions of the sun at significant dates. Other lines seemed to track the movement of bright stars. But the more she measured, the more complicated the picture became. There were hundreds of lines. They pointed in all directions. Finding a few that aligned with celestial events might be coincidence rather than design. Still, Reiche remained convinced of the astronomical theory. It made sense to her mathematical mind. Ancient people everywhere had tracked the sky. Why not the Nazca? The scale and precision of the lines suggested a grand project, something more than decoration, something functional. But Reiche's greatest contribution was not her theories, it was her preservation work. By the 1950s, the Nazca Lines faced new threats. Roads were being built across the plateau. Vehicles drove over the lines, damaging them. Tourists began arriving, walking carelessly over the figures. Local people, unaware of the line's significance, sometimes removed stones for construction. The desert, which had protected the lines for centuries, could not protect them from modernity. Reiche became their guardian. She lobbied the Peruvian government for protection. She gave lectures and wrote articles to raise awareness. She used her own money to hire guards. She placed stones along the edges of major figures to mark their boundaries. She confronted people who drove vehicles onto the plateau. She stood between the lines and those who would damage them. Her dedication was absolute. She never married. She had no children. Her family remained in Germany, but she rarely returned. The lines were her life. She slept near them. She studied them. She protected them. People called her the Lady of the Lines. Others called her the Priestess of the Plains. In 1994, Reiche's work received formal recognition. The Peruvian government declared the Nazca Lines a protected archaeological zone. In 1994, UNESCO designated them a World Heritage Site. The lines would be preserved for future generations. Reiche's mission had succeeded. She continued working into her 90s. Even when her eyesight failed, she would have assistants drive her to the plateau. She would sit in a chair and listen to descriptions of the lines. She would recall measurements from memory. She would tell stories of her decades studying the figures. Maria Reiche passed away in 1998. She was 95 years old. She was buried in the desert she had loved. Her grave lies near the lines she spent a lifetime protecting. Her legacy is complex. Her astronomical theories have been challenged by later researchers. Many scholars now believe the lines served multiple purposes, not solely astronomical ones, but without Reiche, the lines might have been destroyed. Without her careful documentation, much knowledge would have been lost. Without her advocacy, the world might never have recognized the Nazca Lines as a treasure worth preserving. She gave her life to them. She asked for nothing in return. She lived in poverty so the lines might endure. She worked in solitude so others might one day understand. She was a scholar, an activist, and a guardian. The desert remembers her still. The Gallery of Giants, a tour of the iconic figures. The Nazca Lines include approximately 300 geometric forms and 70 distinct biomorphs. Biomorphs are figures shaped like living things. Animals, plants, and humanoid shapes drawn in single, continuous lines across the desert floor. Each one is enormous. Each one is precise. Each one invites questions about purpose and meaning. Let us walk through the gallery. The hummingbird is perhaps the most famous. It stretches more than 300 feet in length. The body is a trapezoid. The wings spread wide, each feather carefully delineated. The beak extends forward, long and thin, as if reaching for a flower. The tail fans out behind. The entire figure was created by removing the dark surface stones to reveal the lighter soil beneath. From the ground, it appears as a series of cleared paths. From the air, the bird takes flight. The hummingbird sits alone on the southern part of the plateau. No other figures crowd it. The space around it remains clear. This isolation suggests importance. Perhaps it was meant to be seen without distraction. Perhaps it held special meaning in Nazca cosmology. Hummingbirds are native to the region. They appear frequently in Nazca pottery and textiles. The culture clearly valued them. They may have been associated with water, with life, with the cycle of seasons. In a desert where water determines survival, such symbols carry weight. The spider lies to the east. It measures about 150 feet in length. The body is circular. 8 legs extend outward, each jointed and detailed. The spider is anatomically accurate. Researchers have identified it as a species of Ricynulae, a rare type of spider found in remote parts of the Amazon rainforest. How the Nazca people knew of this species remains unclear. Trade networks extended into the jungle. Perhaps travelers brought back descriptions or specimens. The spider's precision is remarkable. Each leg tapers correctly, the joints bend at natural angles, the proportions hold. Creating such accuracy at this scale required planning. Someone had to sketch the design. Someone had to calculate the proportions. Teams of workers had to follow the plan across hundreds of feet of desert. The monkey sits to the north. It is one of the largest figures, covering an area equivalent to 2 football fields. The body is rotund. 4 limbs extend in playful poses. The tail spirals in a perfect coil, circling 9 times before terminating in 3 fingers. The face is simple, almost childlike. Monkeys do not live in the Nazca Desert. They live in the jungle, far to the east, yet they appear frequently in Nazca art. They seem to have held symbolic importance. Perhaps they represented the distant, lush regions where water was abundant. Perhaps they symbolized playfulness or cleverness. The spiral tail may have had astronomical significance. Some researchers have suggested it represents the constellations or the path of the sun. The condor stretches more than 400 feet from wingtip to wingtip. It is the largest bird figure on the plateau. The wings are spread as if in flight. The head is detailed with a ruff of feathers around the neck. The body is powerful and compact. Condors still fly over the Andes. They are sacred birds in Andean culture. They are associated with mountains, sky, and the upper world. The condor's placement is strategic. It sits near the edge of a large pampa, visible from multiple angles. The figure seems to soar even while etched into the ground. This is a bird of the heights brought down to the earth, a creature of air rendered in stone and sand. The pelican is less famous but equally impressive. It measures about 900 feet in length, making it one of the longest figures. The body is elongated, the beak is massive, distinctive. The wings are folded as if the bird is resting. Pelicans are coastal birds common along the Pacific shore. They fish in the ocean and roost on cliffs. Their presence in Nazca art suggests a connection to the sea, to fishing, to the resources of the coast. Then there is the so-called astronaut. This figure is different. It sits on a hillside rather than the flat pampa. It measures about 100 feet in height. The body is humanoid. The head is round with 2 large eyes. One arm is raised, the other points downward. The figure looks out over the plateau as if surveying the lines. The astronaut earned its nickname in the 1960s when Erich von Däniken popularized the ancient astronaut theory. He claimed the figure represented an alien visitor. The round head was a helmet. The raised arm was a wave. The posture was that of someone in a spacesuit. This interpretation has been thoroughly debunked. The figure is far more likely to represent a Nazca deity or shaman. The large eyes are consistent with other Nazca religious imagery. The pose may indicate blessing or ritual gesture. Still, the nickname stuck. The astronaut remains one of the most visited figures. Partly due to the fame von Däniken's book brought to the lines, there are dozens more: a whale, a fox, a lizard, a tree, a flower, each one drawn with care, each one massive in scale, each one part of a larger artistic and spiritual vision that covered the desert floor. Walking among them, one feels dwarfed. These are not human-scale creations. They are monuments. They are messages. They are art intended for a perspective the creators could never achieve, and yet they achieved it. Through planning and effort and communal labor, they brought these figures into being. The gallery remains open. The desert sun illuminates the lines. The wind stays calm, and the figures endure, silent and enormous, waiting for eyes that can see them whole. The straight paths, exploring the geoglyphs and geometric forms. The biomorphs captivate attention. The animals and figures draw the eye, but they represent only a small fraction of the Nazca Lines. The vast majority of the lines are geometric: straight lines, trapezoids, triangles, spirals, zigzags. These forms cover far more area than the animal figures. They form the true substance of the plateau. Some lines run perfectly straight for miles. They ignore topography. They climb hillsides and descend into gullies without deviating. They point toward distant mountains or toward the horizon. Some are narrow, only a few feet wide. Others are broad avenues, 20 or 30 feet across. A few stretch for more than 9 miles. How did the Nazca people achieve such straightness over such distances? The answer lies in simple but effective surveying techniques. Researchers have replicated the process. A team places wooden stakes at intervals. They use ropes to establish sightlines. They align the stakes by eye, checking from multiple positions. Once the path is set, workers remove the dark surface stones along the line. The result is a perfectly straight cleared path visible for miles. The precision is remarkable. Modern measurements using satellite imagery show that many lines deviate less than a few feet over their entire length. This level of accuracy requires skill and patience. It also requires a clear vision of the final result. Someone planned these lines, someone directed the work, someone ensured that the path held true. But what were they for? Trapezoids are another common form. These are large cleared areas, wider at one end than the other. Some trapezoids cover more than a square mile. They are smooth and flat, the stones carefully removed to create an open space. They often connect to straight lines, forming a network of paths and plazas. Some researchers believe trapezoids served as ceremonial spaces, places where large groups could gather, areas for dancing, processions, or offerings. The scale suggests communal activity. No individual or small group would need such vast cleared spaces. These were made for populations, for festivals, for public ritual. Others suggest the trapezoids had astronomical functions. Their orientation varies, but many align roughly with cardinal directions or with the positions of the sun at solstices. Perhaps they served as sighting platforms, places where priests or astronomers could observe celestial events. Triangles appear less frequently, but are equally striking. They point in specific directions. Some are small, others enormous. The largest triangles are visible from miles away. Their purpose remains unclear. Some may be markers. Others may connect to lines or trapezoids in a larger symbolic network. Spirals are rare but significant. A few large spirals exist on the plateau, their paths curving inward in tight, regular coils. Creating a perfect spiral at this scale requires mathematical understanding. The curve must tighten at a consistent rate. The spacing must remain even. The Nazca people clearly possess such knowledge. Zigzag lines also appear. These are less common than straight lines, but equally intentional. They move across the landscape in regular, angular patterns. Their purpose is unknown. They may represent water, lightning, or serpents. They may be symbolic rather than functional. Taken together, these geometric forms create a landscape of meaning. The plateau becomes a text written in stone and sand. Each line, each shape, each cleared space is a word in a language we struggle to read. The grammar is unfamiliar, the syntax is unclear, but the intention is unmistakable. The lines were not random, they were not accidental. They were planned, executed, and maintained over centuries. Multiple generations contributed to them. Older lines were sometimes crossed by newer ones. Some areas were reworked, some lines were extended or modified. The plateau was a living project, always growing, always changing. Standing at a high point and looking across the pampa, the complexity becomes overwhelming. Lines intersect. Trapezoids overlap. Figures sit beside geometric forms. The entire landscape is woven together in a pattern that suggests deep intention, but resists simple explanation. Some researchers have proposed that the entire plateau functioned as a single, unified ritual space, a sacred geography where every line and shape contributed to a cosmological map. The pathways may have been routes for processions. The trapezoids may have been gathering places. The figures may have marked important locations or honored specific deities. Water is a recurring theme in many theories. The Nazca region is arid. Survival depends on the seasonal rivers that flow down from the Andes. The Nazca people built sophisticated underground aqueducts called puquios to capture and channel this water. Some scholars believe the lines were offerings to water deities. Walking the lines may have been a form of prayer. Clearing the trapezoids may have been a communal act of devotion meant to ensure rain. Other researchers focus on the astronomical aspects. While not all lines align with celestial events, enough do to suggest this was a consideration. Perhaps the geometric network served multiple purposes. both practical and spiritual, both astronomical and religious. The truth may be that we are asking the wrong questions. We seek a single explanation when the lines may have had many meanings, many uses, many layers of significance. They may have been paths and calendars and offerings and art all at once. The Nazca people were sophisticated. Their culture was rich. Their worldview was complex. Reducing the lines to a single function may be too simple. What we know for certain is that the lines required immense effort. Thousands of people must have participated in their creation. Tons of stone were moved. Miles of earth were cleared. Decades or centuries of labor were invested. This was not a casual project. This was central to Nazca society. It mattered to them deeply. The geometric forms stretch on across the plateau. They connect and divide. They point and enclose. They remain a mystery written large upon the earth. The Nazca people, architects of the desert. Before we can understand the lines, we must understand the people who made them. The Nazca culture flourished in the coastal valleys and adjacent desert of southern Peru between approximately 100 BCE and 800 CE. They were not builders of great cities like the later Inca. They did not leave behind monumental stone architecture. What they left was pottery, textiles, and the lines themselves. The Nazca people lived in small settlements clustered along river valleys. The rivers descending from the Andes provided water for agriculture. Maize, beans, squash, and cotton grew in the valley floors. The Nazca cultivated these crops using sophisticated irrigation techniques. They built underground channels called puquios to tap into aquifers and transport water across the arid land. Some of these puquios still function today. The coastal location provided additional resources. Fish, shellfish, and seabirds supplemented the agricultural diet. Marine products appear frequently in Nazca art, suggesting the ocean held both practical and symbolic importance. Nazca society was likely organized into kin-based groups or chiefdoms. No evidence suggests a centralized state. Instead, power seems to have been distributed among various settlements. Ritual specialists, shamans, and priests held significant authority. Much of Nazca art depicts supernatural beings, suggesting religion played a central role in daily life. The pottery is remarkable. Nazca ceramics are among the finest produced in ancient Peru. They are painted in multiple colors: red, black, white, yellow, and brown. The designs are intricate and varied. Common motifs include supernatural beings with feline features, birds, fish, human heads, and agricultural products. Many vessels depict what appear to be shamanic transformations, where human figures merge with animal traits. The pottery was not merely decorative. It served ceremonial purposes. Vessels have been found in burial sites, often deliberately broken as part of funerary rituals. The images painted on the pottery likely held religious or mythological significance, telling stories or representing deities. Textiles were equally sophisticated. The Nazca wove cotton and camelid wool into intricate fabrics. They used natural dyes to create vivid colors. The designs often mirror those found on pottery: birds, fish, supernatural beings, and geometric patterns. Some textiles were used as clothing. Others served as burial wrappings. The finest examples show a level of craftsmanship that rivals any textile tradition in the world. Burial practices reveal much about Nazca beliefs. The dead were wrapped in multiple layers of textiles and placed in seated positions. Offerings accompanied them: pottery, food, tools, and sometimes trophy heads. The presence of trophy heads in Nazca art and burials has sparked debate. Some appear to be war trophies. Others may have been ritual objects. The practice suggests warfare or ritual violence played a role in Nazca society, though the exact nature remains unclear. Religious life centered on natural forces. The Nazca worshipped deities associated with water, agriculture, and fertility. The ocean, mountains, and sky all held spiritual significance. Shamans likely mediated between the human and supernatural worlds, using hallucinogenic plants to achieve altered states. Pottery depicts figures holding San Pedro cactus, a plant still used in Andean shamanic practices today. The Nazca people were not isolated. Trade networks connected them to other regions. Goods from the Amazon, the highlands, and the northern coast have been found in Nazca sites. Ideas and artistic styles flowed along these trade routes. The spider figure on the Nazca Plateau, representing a species from the rainforest, is evidence of these connections. Around 800 CE, the Nazca culture declined. The reasons remain debated. Climate change may have played a role. Evidence suggests a prolonged drought affected the region. Rivers decreased in flow. Agriculture became more difficult. The Puquillos may not have been sufficient to sustain the population. Environmental stress could have led to social collapse. Warfare also increased during this period. Trophy heads become more common in the archaeological record. Settlements show signs of fortification. Perhaps resource scarcity led to conflict. Perhaps external groups invaded. The exact sequence of events is unclear. By 800 CE, the Nazca culture had faded. New groups moved into the region. The Wari Empire, expanding from the highlands, exerted influence over the coast. Nazca artistic styles disappeared. The pottery changed. The textiles transformed. The old ways ended. But the lines remained. Even after the Nazca people were gone, the lines endured. They outlasted the culture that made them. They survived droughts, conflicts, and the passage of centuries. The desert preserved them when nothing else remained. Understanding the Nazca people helps us understand the lines. These were not primitive people blindly creating marks in the sand. They were sophisticated artisans, engineers, and spiritual practitioners. They understood their environment. They mastered their materials. They coordinated large-scale projects across generations. The lines are not mysteries in the sense of being incomprehensible. They are mysteries only because we do not fully understand the worldview that created them. We see the lines from our perspective, our culture, our assumptions. We ask questions shaped by our own experiences. But the Nazca people saw the world differently. Their questions were not ours. Their answers were not ours. The lines made sense to them in ways we are still learning to grasp. They walked the paths they created. They gathered in the cleared spaces. They looked toward the mountains and the sky. They honored their gods. They marked the earth with images of the creatures and forces that sustained them. They left us this legacy, not as a puzzle to solve, but as a window into a different way of being human. Theories of the ancients: water, gods, and the celestial cycle. Why did the Nazca people create the lines? This question has driven decades of research. Multiple theories have emerged, each offering a different perspective. Some focus on astronomy, others emphasize religion, some highlight water and agriculture. The truth likely encompasses all of these. The astronomical theory, championed by Paul Kosak and Maria Rijke, proposes that the lines served as a giant calendar. Certain lines align with the rising and setting points of the sun at solstices and equinoxes. Other lines may point toward significant stars. The Nazca people depended on agriculture. Knowing when to plant required tracking celestial cycles. The lines could have been markers, allowing priests to observe the sky and predict seasonal changes. The theory is appealing. Many ancient cultures tracked celestial events. The Egyptians aligned pyramids with stars. The Maya built elaborate calendars. Why not the Nazca? However, problems exist with the astronomical theory. There are hundreds of lines pointing in all directions. While some align with significant celestial events, many do not. Gerald Hawkins, an astronomer who studied Stonehenge, analyzed the Nazca lines in the 1960s using computer models. He found that the number of astronomical alignments was no greater than would be expected by chance. In other words, some lines happen to point toward celestial events simply because so many lines exist. This does not mean the Nazca people ignored the sky. They almost certainly observed celestial cycles. Some lines may have been intentionally aligned, but the idea that the entire plateau functioned as an astronomical observatory is difficult to support. The lines are too numerous and too varied in orientation. A second theory focuses on water. Proposed by anthropologist Johann Reinhardt and others, this theory suggests the lines were offerings to water deities and mountain spirits. Water is scarce in the Nazca region. Survival depends on rivers flowing from the Andes. The Nazca people worship deities associated with water, mountains, and fertility. Walking the lines may have been a ritual act, a form of prayer to ensure rain and agricultural success. Many lines point toward mountains. Mountains are the source of water in this landscape. They capture moisture from clouds. They feed the rivers. Andean cultures have long regarded mountains as sacred beings. The Nazca likely held similar beliefs. Creating lines that point toward mountains could have been a way of honoring these powerful entities. The trapezoids fit this theory as well. These large cleared areas may have been places for communal ceremonies. Offerings of food, drink, and crafted goods could have been left for the gods. Processions might have followed the straight lines, with participants walking toward the mountains in acts of devotion. Evidence supports the water theory. Pottery often depicts water deities. Trophy heads found in burials may have been offerings related to water and fertility rituals. The puquios, those underground aqueducts, show how central water management was to Nazca life. In a place where rain falls once every few years, water becomes the difference between survival and collapse. Some researchers have found that certain lines align with underground water sources. The lines may have marked aquifer locations or drainage patterns. This practical function could have merged with religious significance. Following a line toward a mountain while knowing it also traces underground water would unite the spiritual and practical in a single act. A third theory emphasizes pilgrimage and ritual pathways. Anthropologist Clive Ruggles and others have proposed that the lines functioned as sacred routes. Groups would walk along them during religious festivals. The act of walking, of physically traversing the path, was itself the ritual. The destination might have been less important than the journey. This theory fits with what we know about Andean religious practices. Walking pilgrimage routes remains central to Andean spirituality. The Inca created the Capac Ñan, an extensive road network partly used for religious processions. Modern Andean communities still walk sacred paths during festivals. The Nazca Lines could represent an earlier expression of this tradition. The biomorphs, the animal figures, might have marked special locations along these routes. A pilgrimage could follow a line to the hummingbird, where offerings were made. Another route might lead to the monkey. Each figure could have represented a different deity or spiritual concept. Walking from figure to figure across the plateau could have been an extended religious journey. The scale makes sense if we think of communal participation. Entire communities could have gathered to walk the lines. The trapezoids provided spaces large enough for hundreds of people. The straight paths could accommodate processions. Creating the lines would itself have been a communal ritual, an act of devotion performed over generations. A fourth theory, less discussed but intriguing, suggests the lines served as social cohesion mechanisms. Building the lines required organization and cooperation. Different kin groups might have been responsible for different sections. The act of creating and maintaining the lines would have reinforced social bonds and group identity. The lines became markers of community effort and shared purpose. This theory does not exclude others. The lines could have served multiple functions simultaneously. They could have been astronomical markers, water offerings, pilgrimage routes, and community projects all at once. Ancient cultures often embedded multiple meanings into single acts or objects. The lines need not have had just one purpose. What we observe in Nazca art supports a complex religious worldview. The pottery shows supernatural beings transforming between human and animal forms. It depicts shamans in altered states. It includes imagery of severed heads, possibly related to agricultural fertility rituals. The textiles show similar themes. This was a culture deeply engaged with the spiritual realm. The lines fit into this worldview. They are too large to be seen from the ground, suggesting they were meant for supernatural eyes. The gods or ancestors could see them from the sky. The mountain spirits could observe them from their peaks. Creating something for divine rather than human perspective makes sense in a religious context. Some scholars suggest the lines represent an effort to communicate with forces beyond human scale. To make oneself seen by the gods required working at a divine scale. The lines are prayers written large enough to be read from the heavens. Modern Andean communities sometimes offer insights. Though separated by centuries, some continuities exist in Andean culture. When anthropologists have asked local people about the lines, some describe them as seques, sacred lines connecting important sites. The Inca used seque systems in Cusco, organizing space according to religious and astronomical principles. The Nazca lines could be an earlier version of this practice, but we must be careful not to project later practices onto earlier ones. The Nazca and Inca were separated by centuries. Cultural continuity exists, but so do changes. The Nazca lines must be understood within their own context, not simply through the lens of later Andean cultures. What remains certain is that the lines mattered profoundly to the Nazca people. They invested enormous labor in creating and maintaining them. They organized their society around them. They returned to them generation after generation. Whether for astronomy, water, pilgrimage, or social cohesion, the lines were central to Nazca life. The desert holds the evidence. The lines stretch across the pampa, pointing and connecting. They wait for us to understand not just what they are, but what they meant. We may never fully know, but in seeking to understand, we glimpse the minds and hearts of people who lived close to the earth and reached toward the sky. The how. Simple tools and grand ambitions. Creating the Nazca Lines required no advanced technology. No metal tools were necessary. No complex machinery was needed. The Nazca people accomplished this monumental task with materials readily available in their environment: wood, stone, rope, and human labor. That was enough. The desert surface consists of a layer of dark, oxidized stones and pebbles. Beneath lies lighter soil, a mixture of sand, clay, and gypsum. The contrast between dark surface and light subsurface is stark. Remove the dark stones, and you reveal a pale path that stands out against the surrounding landscape. The process is simple. Workers would mark the outline of the intended line or figure. They would then carefully remove the dark surface stones, piling them along the edges. This creates a low border that helps define and protect the cleared area. The exposed, lighter soil beneath forms the visible line. Experiments conducted by modern researchers have replicated this process. Teams of volunteers, using only wooden stakes and ropes, have successfully created small geoglyphs following ancient techniques. The work is labor-intensive but straightforward. No specialized skills are required beyond patience and organization. For straight lines extending miles across the landscape, the Nazca people likely used a surveying technique based on sight lines. Wooden stakes would be placed at intervals. A person standing at the first stake would sight along the intended path. Additional stakes would be positioned in alignment. By checking the alignment from multiple positions and adjusting stakes as needed, a perfectly straight line could be established over great distances. Once the stakes marked the path, workers would remove stones along the line. The width of the line determined how many workers could work simultaneously. Narrow lines might be created by a single person or small team. The broad avenues required larger groups. For curves and complex figures, the process was more involved. The design had to be planned carefully. Some researchers suggest that small-scale models were created first, perhaps drawn in the sand or sketched on pottery. These models could then be scaled up using geometric principles. Creating a figure like the hummingbird required precise proportions. The Nazca people understood basic geometry. They could calculate ratios and maintain consistent curves. One technique involves using a central point and a rope of fixed length. By pivoting the rope around the point, a perfect circle or arc can be drawn. Multiple circles of different radii, centered at different points, can create complex curved forms. The monkey's spiral tail demonstrates mathematical sophistication. A spiral that tightens at a regular rate requires understanding of geometric progression. Each coil must be slightly smaller than the previous one, maintaining a consistent ratio. The Nazca achieved this with remarkable precision. The scale is what impresses. Modern people, familiar with aerial photography and satellite imagery, can easily imagine what a giant ground drawing would look like from above. But the Nazca people created these figures without ever seeing them complete from the air. They worked from ground level, trusting their measurements and their vision. Some figures show evidence of error correction, lines that were started and then abandoned, adjustments made mid-construction. This indicates the builders were learning as they worked. Early attempts might have been less successful. Later figures show greater confidence and skill. The process evolved over time. The labor involved was substantial. Researchers estimate that a figure like the hummingbird required several weeks of work by a team of perhaps 20 to 30 people. The larger figures and the extensive network of lines represent thousands of hours of collective effort. This raises questions about organization. Who planned the figures? Who directed the work? Who decided which lines would be created and where? A society capable of such coordinated labor must have had leadership structures and methods for organizing communal projects. Some scholars suggest that creating the lines was itself a religious act. The labor was an offering, Participating in the construction brought spiritual benefits. The process, not just the result, mattered. If true, then organizing labor would have been easier. People participated willingly, motivated by faith rather than coercion. The simplicity of the technology is striking. No wheeled vehicles were used. The Nazca people had no metal tools suitable for moving large quantities of earth. Everything was done by hand. Yet they accomplished something that awes us millennia later. This demonstrates an important truth about human achievement. Technology is not the only measure of sophistication. Vision, organization, and dedication can accomplish extraordinary things with simple means. The Nazca Lines are not impressive because of advanced tools. They are impressive because of what they represent: human imagination and collective will. The desert cooperated. The climate preserved what the hands created. Rain would have washed away the lines. Wind would have scattered the stones. But in this driest of places, the conditions were perfect. What was made remained. Modern conservation efforts face the challenge of maintaining the lines without altering them. Simply walking on the cleared areas can cause damage. Vehicles create permanent tracks. Even the wind stirred up by helicopters can displace stones. The fragility of the lines is part of their wonder. They have survived not because they are durable, but because the environment has protected them. The Nazca people could not have known their creations would last centuries. They built for their own time, for their own purposes. The longevity is accidental, a gift of geography and climate. Yet in that accident, we receive a legacy, a chance to see what ancient hands made, a window into minds that dreamed on a grand scale and had the patience to make those dreams real. The tools were simple, the ambition was vast, the achievement endures. The alien hypothesis, Erich von Däniken and the modern myth. In 1968, a Swiss author named Erich von Däniken published a book called Chariots of the Gods. The book proposed a radical theory: ancient monuments around the world, the pyramids of Egypt, the statues of Easter Island, and the Nazca Lines were not created by ancient humans. They were created by, or with the help of, extraterrestrial visitors. Advanced aliens had come to Earth in the distant past, and primitive humans had worshipped them as gods. Von Däniken argued that the Nazca Lines were runways for alien spacecraft. The long, straight lines were landing strips. The trapezoids were parking areas. The figures were signals, visible from space, indicating to alien pilots where to land. Ancient people could not have created such enormous, precise works without help from technologically advanced beings. The lines were proof of alien contact. The book became a sensation. It sold millions of copies worldwide. It inspired films, television specials, and countless imitators. The idea of ancient astronauts captured popular imagination. The Nazca Lines became central to this narrative. Photographs of the lines illustrated the book's cover and filled its pages. For many people, the lines became synonymous with alien intervention. Von Däniken's theory rested on several assumptions. First, that ancient people lacked the intelligence or capability to create such works. Second, that the lines must have had a practical, technological purpose, runways for vehicles. Third, that because the lines are best viewed from the air, they must have been made for beings who could fly. All of these assumptions are flawed. The Nazca people were fully capable of creating the lines. As discussed earlier, the technology required was simple. The process, while labor-intensive, was straightforward. Archaeological evidence demonstrates that the Nazca culture was sophisticated. Their pottery, textiles, and engineering work show advanced understanding of materials and design. They needed no outside help. The idea that the lines are runways is easily dismissed. The lines are not flat, smooth surfaces suitable for landing aircraft. They are simply cleared areas with stones removed. The underlying soil is soft. No spacecraft could land on them without sinking or becoming stuck. The lines show no wear patterns consistent with repeated landings. No physical evidence suggests they were ever used as runways. Furthermore, the lines are not all parallel or uniformly oriented. Many intersect. Some are narrow footpaths. Others are trapezoids that widen at one end. None of these features make sense as runways. An advanced civilization capable of interstellar travel would not need hundreds of miles of primitive landing strips carved into a desert. They would have more efficient methods. The argument that the lines must have been made for aerial viewing also fails. Yes, the lines are best appreciated from the air, but they were created for spiritual, not technological reasons. Many religious monuments are designed to be seen by gods rather than humans. Medieval cathedrals have elaborate roof decorations visible only to heaven. Hindu temples have intricate carvings on their highest points, far above human sight lines. Creating something for divine rather than human eyes is a common religious impulse. The Nazca people likely believed their gods resided in the sky, the mountains, and the spiritual realm beyond ordinary perception. The lines were meant for these divine beings. The scale was intentional. It demonstrated devotion and effort. It made human work visible to supernatural forces. Von Däniken's theory also ignores the context of Nazca culture. The lines are not isolated anomalies. They are part of a broader artistic and religious tradition. The same motifs that appear in the lines, birds, spiders, monkeys, appear in Nazca pottery and textiles. These are indigenous symbols, not alien ones. The lines fit seamlessly into what we know about Nazca beliefs and practices. Archaeologists and anthropologists have consistently rejected the ancient astronaut theory. It lacks evidence. It relies on assumptions about ancient people that are both condescending and inaccurate. It ignores the rich cultural context of the sites it seeks to explain. Yet the theory persists in popular culture. Why does it persist? Perhaps because it offers a simple answer to a complex question. The Nazca Lines are mysterious. They inspire wonder. Saying aliens did it provides closure without requiring engagement with history, archaeology, or cultural understanding. It reduces mystery to a single, exciting narrative. But this simplification does a disservice to the Nazca people. It dismisses their achievements. It suggests they were incapable of greatness without outside intervention. This is fundamentally disrespectful to the culture that actually created the lines. The real story of a sophisticated ancient people organizing communal labor to create religious monuments is far more interesting than the alien hypothesis. It speaks to human creativity, dedication, and spiritual depth. It shows what people can accomplish through vision and cooperation. It connects us to our ancestors in meaningful ways. The alien theory, by contrast, disconnects us. It places the achievement outside human history. It makes the lines incomprehensible rather than understandable. It turns them into props in a science fiction narrative rather than genuine expressions of human culture. Modern research has thoroughly debunked von Däniken's claims. Yet the alien hypothesis continues to appear in documentaries, online forums, and casual conversation. It has become a modern myth, ironically detached from the evidence just as ancient myths were detached from literal truth. The Nazca Lines do not need aliens to be remarkable. They are remarkable precisely because humans made them. With simple tools and enormous dedication, the Nazca people created something that endures across centuries. They reached beyond themselves toward the divine. They left us a legacy that invites wonder and study. The truth is more compelling than fiction. The lines are human. They are ancient. They are ours to understand, not as puzzles requiring aliens to explain, but as windows into the minds of people who saw the world differently than we do. That is their true mystery. That is their true power. Whispers from the Sky, the astronomical alignment debate. The night sky above the Nazca Desert is spectacular. Far from city lights, the stars shine with brilliant clarity. The Milky Way stretches across the heavens like a river of light. Planets move slowly against the fixed stars. The moon waxes and wanes. The sun traces its path from horizon to horizon. Ancient people observed these patterns. They tracked the movements of celestial bodies. They noted cycles and regularities. The sky was both calendar and clock. For agricultural societies, knowing when to plant and harvest was essential. The stars provided that knowledge. Did the Nazca people use their lines to track the sky? Paul Kosak believed they did. His observation that one line aligned with the sunset at winter solstice convinced him the plateau functioned as an astronomical calendar. Maria Rika expanded on this theory. She spent decades measuring lines and calculating their orientations. She identified numerous potential alignments with the sun, moon, and bright stars. Some alignments seem compelling. Certain lines do point toward the rising or setting sun at solstices. Others align with stars that would have been prominent in the night sky 2,000 years ago. The Pleiades, a star cluster important in many ancient cultures, appears in some calculations. The bright star Canopus, visible in the southern hemisphere, aligns with certain lines. But how many alignments are meaningful and how many are coincidence? In the 1960s, Gerald Hawkins, the astronomer who had studied Stonehenge, turned his attention to the Nazca Lines. He used computer analysis to test the astronomical theory. He calculated the positions of the sun, moon, and bright stars as they would have appeared between 500 BCE and 500 CE. He then compared these positions to the orientations of the lines. His conclusion was sobering. The number of alignments was no greater than chance would predict. With hundreds of lines pointing in all directions, some would inevitably align with celestial events simply by accident. The patterns Reike had identified could not be distinguished from random distribution. Hawkins's work did not disprove that some lines had astronomical significance. It simply showed that the plateau as a whole did not function primarily as an astronomical observatory. The lines were too numerous, too varied in orientation, and too inconsistent in their alignments to support that theory. Other researchers have reached similar conclusions. While individual lines might mark solar or stellar events, the majority do not. The trapezoids, which cover more area than the lines themselves, show no consistent astronomical orientation. The biomorphs are not aligned with celestial patterns. This does not mean the Nazca people ignored the sky. They almost certainly observed celestial cycles. Like all agricultural societies, they needed to track seasons. Some lines may have served as markers for important dates. A priest standing at the end of a particular line might observe the sunrise on the day planting should begin. But this practical use does not require the entire plateau to be an astronomical instrument. A few key alignments would suffice. The rest of the lines could serve other purposes, religious, social, ceremonial, without any astronomical function. The debate continues. Some researchers still argue for astronomical significance. They point to specific alignments that seem too precise to be accidental. They note that many cultures incorporated astronomy into their religious practices. Why would the Nazca be different? Others maintain that the astronomical theory has been overstated. They emphasize the religious and social functions of the lines. They argue that the lines were primarily about water, pilgrimage, and community. Any astronomical alignments were secondary or incidental. A middle position suggests that the lines served multiple purposes. Some may have tracked celestial events, others marked underground water sources. Still others served as processional routes. The plateau was a complex religious landscape, not a single-purpose tool. Recent studies using satellite imagery and advanced surveying techniques have provided new data. Researchers can now measure the orientations of lines with extreme precision. They can model celestial positions with accuracy impossible in earlier decades. This data allows for more rigorous testing of astronomical theories. So far, the results support Hawkins's original conclusion. Most lines do not show significant astronomical alignment. A few do, but not enough to suggest astronomy was the primary motivation. What seems clear is that the Nazca people understood the sky. They observed it. They incorporated celestial knowledge into their culture. But they did not build the lines primarily to track stars. The lines were about more than astronomy. They were about engaging with the sacred landscape, about marking territory, about creating spaces for communal ritual, about offering devotion to gods and ancestors. The sky was part of that worldview. Mountains, water, earth, and sky formed an interconnected whole. The lines may have pointed to mountains where gods dwelt. Those same mountains might have aligned with celestial events. But the alignment was not the point. The mountain was the point. The god was the point. The sky simply participated in a larger cosmological order. Standing on the plateau at night, the stars overhead and the lines stretching into darkness, one can understand the temptation to connect the two. The scale seems cosmic. The precision seems calculated. But perhaps we are projecting our own fascination with astronomy onto a people whose concerns were different. The Nazca people looked up. They saw the stars, but they also looked down. They saw the earth. They looked toward the mountains. They saw the source of water and life. They created the lines to engage with all of it: earth, sky, mountain, water, gods, ancestors. The lines were not a telescope or calendar. They were a prayer. a presence, a way of being in the world. The debate over astronomical alignments reveals how difficult it is to interpret ancient monuments. We bring our questions, we apply our methods, we seek patterns that make sense to us. But the Nazca people had their own questions, their own methods, their own patterns. Understanding them requires more than measurement and calculation. It requires imagination and humility. The stars shine above the desert still, the lines remain below, and we, standing between, continue to wonder what they meant to the people who made them. Modern threats. Preservation in the age of tourism and climate change. The Nazca Lines survived for nearly 2,000 years untouched. The desert protected them. The isolation preserved them. Then came the modern world, and suddenly the lines faced threats they had never encountered. Roads are among the most visible dangers. The Pan American Highway, constructed in the mid-20th century, cuts directly through part of the Nazca Plateau. The road bisects some lines. It obliterates others. When the highway was built, the significance of the lines was not fully understood. By the time preservation became a priority, the damage was done. The road remains, a permanent scar across the ancient designs. Vehicles cause ongoing harm. Despite regulations, motorcycles, trucks, and cars occasionally drive onto the plateau. The weight of vehicles compresses the soil. Tires disturb the carefully cleared surfaces. Tracks remain visible for decades. In some areas, vehicle tracks now obscure the original lines, creating confusion about which marks are ancient and which are modern. Tourism presents a paradox. Public interest helps fund preservation efforts. Visitors from around the world contribute to Peru's economy, providing resources that can be directed toward protecting the lines. But tourism also threatens what it seeks to celebrate. Before regulations were established, tourists could walk directly on the lines. People climbed viewing towers illegally. Some even carved their initials into the desert floor. Footprints damaged the cleared surfaces. The cumulative effect of thousands of visitors walking over the same areas began to erase the lines. In response, Peruvian authorities restricted access. Viewing towers were built at specific locations, allowing tourists to see select figures without walking on them. Flights over the plateau in small aircraft became the primary way to view the lines. From the air, visitors can see the full scope without causing damage. But even controlled tourism has impacts. Helicopters and small planes flying low over the plateau create wind turbulence. This wind can displace loose stones and disturb the surface. While less damaging than direct contact, repeated flights over the same areas may gradually affect the lines. Climate change introduces new concerns. The Nazca region is experiencing shifts in weather patterns. While still one of the driest places on Earth, occasional storms have become slightly more frequent. Rain, even light rain, can damage the lines. Water causes erosion. It moves stones. It alters the surface. Increased wind is another factor. As global temperatures rise, wind patterns shift. Stronger winds can scatter the dark surface stones that were carefully piled along the edges of the lines. Over time, this could blur the contrast between the cleared areas and the surrounding desert. Human carelessness continues to pose risks. In 2014, Greenpeace activists entered the plateau illegally to place a message near the hummingbird figure. They left footprints that damaged the area around the ancient geoglyph. The incident sparked international outrage. It demonstrated how even well-meaning actions can cause irreparable harm. Political protests have also threatened the site. Demonstrators have entered the plateau to display banners or create modern messages. Each incident damages the ancient surface and sets a dangerous precedent. The lines are fragile. Once damaged, they cannot be truly restored. Urban expansion threatens the edges of the protected zone. The town of Nazca has grown. New construction encroaches on areas that may contain undiscovered lines. As the population increases, pressure to develop land intensifies. Balancing economic development with preservation is an ongoing challenge. Funding for conservation is always limited. Peru has many archaeological sites requiring protection. Resources must be distributed among numerous priorities. The Nazca Lines, while internationally famous, compete with other important sites for attention and money. UNESCO's designation of the lines as a World Heritage Site has helped. International recognition brings prestige and can attract funding, but designation alone does not guarantee protection. Enforcement requires personnel, equipment, and ongoing commitment. Surveillance technology offers some solutions. Drones and satellites monitor the plateau. Changes can be detected quickly. Illegal incursions can be documented and prosecuted, but technology requires trained operators and continuous funding. Education plays a crucial role. Local communities must understand the value of the lines. If residents see the site as a source of pride and economic benefit, they become allies in preservation. If they see it as a restriction on their land use, resentment can lead to deliberate or careless damage. Schools in the Nazca region now teach about the lines. Children learn their history and significance. They understand why preservation matters. This creates a generation invested in protecting the site. But education must be ongoing. Each new generation needs to be taught. International cooperation helps. Universities and research institutions from around the world study the lines. They bring expertise and resources. They train local archaeologists. They develop new preservation techniques. This collaboration strengthens Peru's capacity to protect the site. Yet challenges remain formidable. The lines cover a vast area. Patrolling the entire plateau is impossible. Fencing would be prohibitively expensive and visually intrusive. The desert's openness, which protected the lines for centuries, makes them vulnerable to modern threats. Climate change cannot be stopped by local action alone. Even if Peru perfectly protects the site, shifting weather patterns could gradually degrade the lines. This is perhaps the most sobering reality. The long-term survival of the lines may depend on global environmental policies beyond Peru's control. Despite these threats, the lines endure. Preservation efforts have prevented the worst damage. Awareness has increased. Regulations are stronger than in the past. The majority of visitors respect the site. Most local people value their heritage. The lines that survive 2,000 years may survive many more. But survival is not guaranteed. Each generation inherits the responsibility of protecting the lines for those who come after. The Nazca people created something meant to last. Whether it does depends on choices made today. The desert still protects, but only human care can protect against human threats. The lines stretch across the pampa, patient and silent. They have witnessed the rise and fall of empires. They have seen centuries come and go. They wait to see whether the modern world will prove worthy of the trust the ancient builders placed in the future, whether we will preserve what they created, whether their message across time will continue to be heard. An enduring enigma, the lines in the 21st century. 2,000 years after their creation, the Nazca Lines remain visible. The hummingbird still flies across the desert. The monkey's tail still spirals into the distance. The straight lines still point toward mountains and horizons. What the Nazca people created endures. We know much more about the lines now than Paul Kosok knew when he first flew over them. We understand how they were made. We know who made them. We have theories about why. We have documented every major figure and hundreds of minor ones. We have mapped the plateau with satellite precision. We have protected the site from the worst threats. Yet mystery remains. We cannot fully know what the lines meant to the people who created them. We cannot feel what they felt walking those paths. We cannot share their worldview, their beliefs, their sense of the sacred. The lines are a message from the past, but it is a message in a language we do not completely understand. This is not a failure of research. It is the nature of archaeology. We study material remains, we analyze patterns, we compare cultures, we build theories based on evidence, but we cannot recover consciousness. We cannot resurrect the interior experience of being a Nazca person standing on the plateau 2,000 years ago. What we can do is appreciate. We can marvel at the scale and precision. We can recognize the labor and dedication required. We can respect the culture that produced such work. We can protect what remains so future generations might also wonder and learn. The lines are many things. They are art on a monumental scale. They are engineering achievements. They are religious expressions. They are social projects that bound communities together. They are evidence of human creativity and ambition. They are all of these and perhaps more. Different researchers emphasize different aspects. Some focus on astronomy, others on religion, some on social organization. All contribute to understanding. The lines were complex creations serving multiple purposes. No single theory captures their full significance. This complexity is part of their power. Simple answers would diminish them. The fact that they resist easy explanation, that they continue to puzzle and intrigue, keeps them alive in human consciousness. They remain relevant because they remain mysterious. In the 21st century, the lines have become global heritage. They belong to Peru, but they belong also to humanity. People from every nation visit them. Scholars from every continent study them. They appear in documentaries, books, and classrooms around the world. They have entered the collective imagination as symbols of ancient achievement and enduring mystery. Technology continues to reveal new information. LiDAR, satellite imaging, and drone surveys have discovered additional lines previously unknown. Some were hidden beneath sand. Others were too faint to see from the air in earlier decades. Each discovery adds detail to our understanding. Scientists study the lines from new angles. Some analyze soil chemistry to understand preservation. Others model wind patterns to assess climate threats. Still others use computer simulations to test theories about creation methods. The lines remain active subjects of research, yielding new insights with each study. Indigenous perspectives are finally being heard. For too long, Western scholars dominated interpretation. Recent work has included input from Andean communities whose traditions may preserve echoes of ancient beliefs. While we must be cautious about projecting modern practices onto ancient ones, these perspectives enrich understanding. The lines also serve as inspiration. Artists reference them in contemporary works. Writers use them as metaphors. Musicians compose pieces inspired by their patterns. The lines have transcended their original context to become part of global culture, reinterpreted and reimagined across time and place. Yet they remain rooted in the desert. Physical, real, tangible. You can visit them. You can see them from the air. You can stand at the edge of the protected zone and glimpse them stretching into the distance. They are not abstract ideas or distant myths. They are present, material, enduring. This presence connects us to the people who made them. Across 2 millennia, we share something. We stand in the same desert under the same sun. We see what they saw: mountains on the horizon, sky overhead, earth beneath. The context is familiar even if the meaning is not. The lines remind us that people have always been people. We have always sought meaning beyond immediate survival. We have always created. We have always organized ourselves to accomplish tasks too large for individuals. We have always looked to the sky and wondered. We have always made marks upon the earth to say, "We were here. This mattered. Remember us." The Nazca people spoke in lines and figures. They said what they had to say in the language of the desert. The message is not entirely clear to us, but the intention is. They reached towards something greater than themselves. They made their effort visible. They invested years of labor in a project that benefited no one individual but enriched the community and honored the gods. In our age of rapid change and short attention spans, the lines offer a different model. They are products of patience. They were built slowly over generations. They were maintained long after their creators died. They represent continuity, dedication, and long-term vision. These are qualities worth remembering. The lines also teach humility. We, with all our technology and knowledge, still cannot answer every question about them. We make progress, but certainty eludes us. This is good. It reminds us that human culture is deep and varied, that past peoples were not simpler versions of ourselves, that different does not mean lesser. As we move further into the 21st century, the lines face new challenges and new opportunities. Climate change threatens, tourism pressures continue, but awareness grows, technology improves, preservation techniques advance, the will to protect strengthens. The lines will endure if we choose to protect them. That choice is renewed with each generation. The Nazca people created something meant to last. Whether it does depends on us. On the plateau, the wind is calm tonight. The stars shine overhead as they have for millennia. The lines stretch across the sand, dark borders around pale paths. The hummingbird sleeps in the dust. The monkey dreams in stone. The spider waits, patient as the desert itself. They have survived this long. They may survive much longer. They are testament to what people can accomplish when they dream large and work together. They are proof that the human spirit reaches beyond the immediate towards something lasting. They are a message from the past and a gift to the future. The Nazca Lines endure, silent and vast, mysterious and clear, human and transcendent. They wait for eyes that can see them. They wait for minds that can appreciate them. They wait for hearts that can feel the echo of the hands that made them. And the desert keeps them safe, as it always has, dry and still and watchful, preserving what was made so long ago, holding the lines in trust for all who come after, for as long as the earth allows, for as long as people care to remember. The lines remain, the desert remains, the mystery remains, and we, standing at the edge of understanding, looking out across the plateau, are part of that mystery now, connected to the past, responsible for the future. Brief visitors in a story that began long before us and may continue long after. The Nazca Lines are not just ancient art, they are a bridge across time, a conversation between ages, a reminder that human creativity and dedication can create wonders that outlast empires and endure across centuries. That is their gift to us. That is their meaning, whatever else they might have meant to those who made them. The plateau stretches on beneath the stars, the lines remain visible, and the story continues as long as there are people to tell it and listen.